The world was a canvas of screaming alarms and fractured radio calls. Below Captain Ava Valkyrie Rostova, the jagged canyons of the Zagros Mountains tore at the horizon like broken teeth. Her hands, wrapped in worn leather flight gloves, were steady on the control stick of her A-10 Thunderbolt II, a machine they called the Warthog. It wasn't sleek or pretty, but it was honest, and right now, it was the only thing keeping 6 American heroes from being erased from the earth. Valkyrie, where are you? We are pinned. They are everywhere. The voice of Lieutenant Commander Jake Riptide Callahan, leader of SEAL Team Trident 4, crackled through her helmet, laced with the sharp static of desperation and the dull thud of incoming mortar fire. We have, maybe 30 seconds left. They're closing in. Ava's eyes, the color of a stormy sea, scanned the inferno on her targeting display. A cluster of 6 friendly beacons, blinking weakly, were about to be swallowed by over 50. Enemy signatures swarming from the canyon walls. It was a kill box. A perfect, inescapable trap. I see you, Trident, she said, her voice a stark contrast to the chaos, a calm, level tone honed by 1,000 hours of simulation and a lifetime of being told to stay calm. I'm coming in. Hang on. She pushed the throttle forward, and the Warthog's twin engines roared, a guttural cry of defiance. The plane dipped its nose, descending into a hailstorm of red tracer fire that clawed at the sky, desperate to tear her from it. Down there, 6 men were counting on a ghost, a pilot who wasn't supposed to be here, flying a plane that wasn't supposed to be their savior. And as the ground rushed up to meet her, Ava felt a strange sense of peace. This was where she belonged. In the storm, not watching from a distance. The air in the briefing room was stale, thick with the scent of cheap coffee and nervous energy. 100 pilots, all sun-weathered confidence and swagger, sat in tiered rows. Ava sat in the back, a solitary island in a sea of khaki flight suits. She didn't mind the isolation, she preferred it. It allowed her to focus, to see the details. Others missed. And the details of Operation Serpent's Tooth were already bothering her. At the front of the room, Colonel Marcus Thorne paced before a massive digital map of the target zone. He was a man carved from polished granite, with a jaw that looked like it could crack walnuts and a voice that commanded attention. He was a darling of the Pentagon, the kind of officer who knew how to play the game, whose career was a flawless upward trajectory. He also despised her. The objective is simple, ladies and gentlemen, Thorne began, his voice booming. Trident 4, our elite SEAL team, will insert via low-altitude drop at 0400. They'll move to this compound, he tapped a red circle on the map, and retrieve a high-value asset. A scientist with intel that could shift the balance of power in the region. He paused, letting the weight of the mission settle. Air support is paramount. The enemy is entrenched, well supplied, and knows the terrain. Close air support will be the difference between success and another outcome. Ava leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Something was wrong with the insertion point. It was a narrow basin with only 2 egress routes, both easily defended. A classic choke point. The primary CS role, Thorne continued, a faint smirk playing on his lips, will be filled by Captain Davis. A ripple of nods went through the room. Captain Hotshot Davis was the squadron's golden boy, an F-16 pilot with movie star looks and a cockpit record to match. Thorne's eyes then scanned the room and landed directly on Ava. The temperature seemed to drop a few degrees around her. Captain Rostova, he said, the name dripping with a subtle disdain. You'll be flying over watch in Grid Zulu 9, on the far side of the ridge. Your job is to monitor for enemy reinforcements and stay out of the way. Clear. A quiet murmur went through the room. Zulu 9 was a milk run, a meaningless patrol route miles from the real action. It was a public slap in the face. Everyone knew it. Ava felt the familiar sting of humiliation, hot and sharp, but her face remained a mask of professional composure. She knew this wasn't about her skills. It was about her name. Rostova. To Thorne, it was a synonym for disgrace. Her father, Colonel Dmitry Rostova, had been a legendary pilot, a maverick who flew by instinct and grit. But a controversial mission 20 years ago, a mission where Thorne was the co-pilot, had ended his career in shame. He was accused of disobeying orders, of needlessly endangering his men. Thorne had emerged a hero, her father, a pariah crystal. Clear, Colonel, Ava replied, her voice steady. Thorne's smirk widened. Good. We wouldn't want a repeat of history, where Rostova's Unconventional judgment puts American lives at risk. The insult landed with the force of a physical blow. The other pilots shifted uncomfortably, a few glancing at her, with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She felt their eyes on her, judging her not for who she was, but for the ghost that followed her. At the side of the room, the SEALs of Trident 4 were getting their own briefing. Their leader, a tall, powerfully built man with the call sign Riptide on his helmet, caught her eye. He had heard Thorne's remark. He gave her a long, unreadable look, not hostile, but not friendly either. It was a look of cautious assessment. The look a man gives a tool he's not sure he can trust. Later that night, Ava sat in her Spartan quarters. The only personal touch was a framed photograph on her nightstand, a 10-year-old her, beaming, sitting on the shoulders of her father in his flight suit. He looked impossibly strong, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. She remembered his words, a constant refrain from her childhood. The sky doesn't care who you are, Ava. It doesn't care about your name or what people say. It only cares about what you can do. Fly the plane. That's all that matters. But Thorne was making it matter. He was using her father's legacy as a weapon against her, poisoning the well of her reputation before she even had a chance to prove herself. The injustice of it burned in her chest, a low, simmering fire. She wasn't just flying for herself anymore. She was flying for him, to clear the shadow from his name. Unable to sleep, she returned to the empty mission planning room. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the SEAL's insertion point. Thorne had brushed past it. So quickly. She pulled up the satellite imagery, running thermal overlays and geological surveys. Thorne had marked a deep, shadowed canyon adjacent to the basin as a no-fly zone due to geological instability. It was a convenient way to keep air support from having a clear line of sight. Her fingers flew across the console, running spectrum analysis. And then she saw it. A flicker. A tiny, anomalous heat signature deep within the canyon Thorne had forbidden. It wasn't large, but it was consistent. Too consistent for a natural volcanic vent, which is what the official report claimed. It pulsed with a steady, rhythmic energy. The kind of energy put out by electronics. Sophisticated electronics. A cold dread washed over her. It felt wrong. Terribly wrong. The next morning, she approached Thorne as he was leaving the command center, his entourage of subordinate officers flanking him. "Colonel, I need a word." Thorne stopped, turning with an air of profound impatience. "What is it, Captain?" "Sir, I found a discrepancy in the mission intel for Operation Serpent's Tooth," she began, keeping her voice respectful but firm. "The canyon in Grid Foxtrot 4, the one marked as a no-fly zone? The thermal scans show an artificial heat source. It could be a hidden observation post, maybe even a concealed anti-air emplacement." Thorne stared at her for a long moment, his eyes cold and flat. He then let out a short, condescending laugh. The officers around him shuffled their feet, unsure. "Where to look, Captain Rostova?" he said, his voice dangerously low. "Your job is to fly a patrol in Zulu 9. It is not to second-guess my mission plan. The report says it's a volcanic vent. It is a volcanic vent. Are you a geologist now? On top of being a pilot?" "Sir, with all due respect, the signature is inconsistent with geothermal activity. It warrants a closer look. If I'm right, Trident 4 is walking into a trap." Thorne stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "Your father was a paranoid man, Captain. He saw enemies in every shadow, and it clouded his judgment. It ended his career. Do not make the same mistake." He turned to his aides. "See that the captain is reminded of her assigned duties." He then looked back at her, his voice a dismissive whisper. "Stick to flying, Captain, and stay out of my way." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the hallway, his words echoing in the sudden silence. The dismissal was absolute. The door was closed. But as she watched him go, Ava knew she couldn't let it go. This was more than a feeling now. It was a certainty. Those 6 men were being sent to their slaughter. Back in her station, her mind raced. He hadn't just dismissed her, he had been furious. Why? Why was he so adamant about that canyon? Was it ego? Or was it something else? Something he was trying to hide? She knew that defying him further would be career suicide. But the image of those 6 friendly beacons on the map, surrounded by enemies, flashed in her mind. Her father had been disgraced for disobeying an order to save his men. Maybe some things were in the blood after all. She logged into a secondary, low-priority terminal, the kind used for routine diagnostics. Using a series of backdoor commands her father had taught her, tricks he'd called looking under the hood, she bypassed the mission-locked security protocols. She routed a high-resolution satellite to the coordinates of the canyon, not for a simple thermal scan, but for a deep penetrating ground radar analysis. It was highly unauthorized, a fireable offense, and it would take a few hours for the satellite to position and for the data to process. For the next few hours, she sat in forced idleness, every tick of the clock a countdown to disaster. Finally, a notification pinged softly on her screen. The scan was complete. The data streamed in, assembling itself into a three-dimensional wireframe model. Ava leaned closer, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't a volcanic vent. It wasn't an observation post. Beneath the rock and sand, hidden from the sky, was a sprawling network of reinforced tunnels. And nestled in the heart of the complex, pointing directly at the sky above the SEAL's insertion point, was the unmistakable, terrifying signature of an advanced, fully operational surface-to-air missile. Battery. She stared at the screen, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked at the mission clock ticking remorselessly in the corner. Trident 4 was set to depart in less than an hour. They were flying blind into a technologically superior, perfectly laid ambush, and the man in charge of the mission had just ordered her to look the other way. The wireframe model on her screen was a death warrant. Every glowing line, every calculated angle of the hidden missile system confirmed Ava's worst fears. Colonel Thorne hadn't just made a mistake. He had ignored a threat so obvious it felt intentional. There was no time for procedure, no time for climbing the chain of command. She grabbed her data tablet, the 3D model of the tunnel complex still, rotating on its screen, and ran. Her boots pounded against the polished concrete floors of the command wing, echoing in the sterile silence. She burst into the main operations center, a cavernous room filled with the low hum of servers and their quiet intensity of dozens of analysts staring at glowing screens. Colonel Thorne was standing in the center of the room, sharing a laugh with a visiting Air Force general. He was in his element, radiating confidence and control. "Colonel." Ava's voice cut through the quiet hum. Every head in the room turned. Thorne's smile vanished, replaced by a flash of pure fury. He saw the tablet in her hand and knew instantly what she had done. He strode towards her, his face a thunderous mask, intercepting her before she could reach the general. "Captain, what is the meaning of this?" He growled, his voice low enough to avoid a public spectacle but vibrating with menace. "Sir, you have to see this," Ava said, her voice urgent but controlled. She held up the tablet. "It's not a vent. It's a full-blown SAM site. American-made. By the looks of the energy signature. They've got tunnels, command bunkers. It's a fortress. Trident 4's insertion point will be directly in its kill zone." Thorne barely glanced at the screen. His eyes were locked on hers, cold and hard. "I gave you a direct order, Captain. I told you to drop this." "6 men are about to die, sir," she pleaded, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You have to scrub the mission or change the insertion point." "What you've done," Thorne hissed, grabbing her arm and pulling her towards a side corridor, away from prying ears, "is commit an act of gross insubordination. You ran an unauthorized scan, violated at least a dozen security protocols, and now you're disrupting my command center with your paranoid delusions." "It's not a delusion. It's right there." She shook the tablet in front of him. Thorne snatched the tablet from her hand, his fingers jabbing at the screen and shutting it down. "This is over, Captain. You are hereby confined to your ready room station until further notice. You will not communicate with any personnel related to Operation Serpent's Tooth. You will not touch the comm system. You will not go near your aircraft. Am I clear?" The sheer injustice of it stole her breath. He wasn't just ignoring the evidence, he was burying it. And her with it. "Sir, please, think about the men." "I am," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper that was more threatening than any shout. "I'm thinking about how your father's recklessness got good men killed. I won't let his daughter do the same. Muster arms," he called over his shoulder. "Escort Captain Rostova to her station and ensure she stays there." 2 burly security officers appeared, their faces impassive. They flanked her, their presence a silent, immovable wall. As they led her away, she saw Thorne slip her data tablet into his briefcase with a look of grim satisfaction. He was erasing the proof. The SEALs were already on the transport plane, maintaining radio silence, completely unaware that their mission was a suicide run. The weight of their fate pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. They left her in the small, windowless ready room, a glorified closet with a chair and a single monitor displaying her grounded status in bold, red letters. The door clicked shut, the finality of the sound echoing the end of her career. She sank into the chair, her mind a whirlwind of fury and despair. Thorne had beaten her. He had used her father's past to discredit her, and now 6 men would pay the price. A few minutes later, the door creaked open. Standing there was Master Sergeant Sarge O'Malley, her crew chief. He was a man who looked like he'd been assembled from spare aircraft parts, all sharp angles and weathered steel, with hydraulic fluid practically running in his veins. He had served with her father. He'd known her since she was a little girl who dreamed of flying. He closed the door quietly behind him and set a steaming mug of coffee on the small table. "Heard you got your wings clipped," he said, his gravelly voice devoid of judgment. "Something like that," Ava mumbled. Staring at the floor, Sarge leaned against the wall, his arms crossed over his broad chest. "I was there, you know, on your father's last mission. The one Thorne built his career on." Ava looked up, her interest piqued. "Sarge rarely, if ever, talked about the past. Your dad saw something no one else did," Sarge continued, his eyes distant. "An enemy column, hiding in a ravine, waiting to ambush a Marine convoy. The command, Thorne included, said the intel was bad. Ordered your dad to stand down. Said it was a ghost hunt. Dmitri, he disobeyed. He went in alone, broke up the ambush, and saved 24 Marines. But in the process, his wingman got hit. The brass, spurred on by Thorne's testimony, crucified him for it. They said he was reckless, a glory hound who risked his squadron for a phantom." Sarge shook his head slowly. "Your father saw the whole board, kid. Not just the next move. Looks like you do, too." He pushed himself off the wall. "Thorne is a snake. Always has been. He hated your dad for being a better pilot and a better man." He glanced at the monitor. Hotshot's F-16 is due for final systems check in 10. Funny thing about these new models, the hydraulic actuator for the primary flap control has been known to glitch. He gave her a meaningful look. Sometimes takes a good 30-40 minutes to reset. A real pain. Ava's heart skipped a beat. She understood. He was offering her a window. A chance. It was an incredible risk. For him. If he was caught sabotaging an aircraft, his career would be over, and he'd likely face a court-martial. "Sarge, you can't," she whispered. "Just telling you how it is," he said with a shrug. "What you do with that information is up to you. Oh, and the comms link for the maintenance channel on the tarmac is on a separate frequency from the tower. Tends to be a bit of a blind spot, if you catch my drift." He placed a small, greasy toolkit on the table. Tucked inside was a handheld radio. He gave her a slow wink, then turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him once more. Ava stared. At the radio, then at the clock on the wall. The SEALs would be reaching the target zone in less than an hour. Hotshot's jet would be grounded for a precious few minutes. It was now or never. Her decision was instantaneous. Her father had chosen to save lives over following orders. She would do the same. Using the maintenance radio, she contacted the ground crew at her hangar, her voice calm and authoritative. "This is Rostova. We've got a last-minute calibration order from command on Valkyrie 1. I'm heading over now to supervise." It was a flimsy excuse, but at 0300 in the morning, nobody questioned it. She slipped out of the ready room and moved through the darkened base, sticking to the shadows, her heart a drum against her ribs. The desert air was cold, smelling of jet fuel and sagebrush. When she reached her A-10, Sarge was there, pretending to inspect the landing gear. He didn't look at her, but as she passed, he muttered, "Give him hell, kid." She climbed into the cockpit of the Warthog, the familiar smell of worn metal and electronics enveloping her like an old friend. This was her true home. Strapping herself in, she began the pre-flight sequence from memory, her movements swift and efficient. The canopy hissed shut, sealing her in her own world. Through the maintenance channel, she got clearance to taxi 4. What the tower thought was a systems test on the far runway to as she taxied into position, She kept her radio silent, monitoring the main command channel. The base was still quiet. No alarms. So far, so good. She lined up the lumbering jet on the dark strip of asphalt, the runway lights stretching out before her like a path to destiny. She took a deep breath, her father's words echoing in her mind. Fly the plane, she pushed the throttles to maximum. The engine screamed to life, and the Warthog, her Valkyrie's chariot, surged forward, pressing her back into her seat. It lifted off the ground, a graceless, powerful beast climbing into the pre-dawn sky. She was airborne. And she was a renegade. She flew low, hugging the contours of the desert floor, a fleeting shadow under the moon. She was a ghost, invisible, to the base's primary radar. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to save her career. But the thought of those 6 men, of Riptide's look of weary assessment, pushed her onward. She switched her comms to the encrypted channel for operation. Serpent's tooth, listening only. For 10 minutes, there was nothing but the soft hiss of empty airwaves. Then, it came a burst of static, then Riptide's voice, sharp and frantic. Ambush. We are in a kill box. I repeat, Trident 4 is in a kill box. They're firing from the ridges. Hotshot, where is our air support? A tense silence followed. Ava's grip tightened on the control stick. Then, a new voice broke the silence. It was cold, precise, and filled with a terrible, calculated calm. It was Colonel Thorne, his voice broadcasting from the command center for all to hear. Hotshot is grounded with a mechanical failure. All air assets stand by. Another pause. Then, directly to her. Valkyrie, your unauthorized departure has been noted. You are ordered to stand down and return to base immediately. I repeat, that is a direct order, Captain. On her tactical display, the grim reality bloomed in stark colors. The 6 blinking blue lights of Trident 4 were now surrounded by a sea of red. Dozens of enemy soldiers were converging on their position from the very canyon she had warned Thorne about. She had a choice. Obey the order, return to base, and let Thorne's treachery succeed. Or she could disobey, cementing her status as a criminal, and fly into the heart of the fire. There was no choice at all, really. Her thumb moved to the transmit button. Ava's voice cut through the panic chatter on the command channel, as clear and sharp as breaking glass. Negative, Colonel. I'm engaging. The transmission ended with a decisive click. In the Nellis Air Force Base Command Center, a stunned silence fell. Colonel Thorne's face went white with rage. On the other side of the world, pinned down behind a crumbling rock wall, the men of Trident 4 heard her words like a prayer answered from an empty heaven. They had no idea who Valkyrie was, only that someone was coming. Ava banked the Warthog. Hard, the G-force pressing her deep into her seat. She descended into the winding, treacherous canyon, the rock walls rising up on either side of her like ancient, monolithic sentinels. Down below, the battlefield was a chaotic symphony of muzzle, flashes and explosions. The SEALs were making their last stand, their ammunition dwindling, their time measured in heartbeats. They heard her before they saw her. It started as a high-pitched whine, a sound that sliced through the cacophony of the firefight. It grew, rapidly, deepening into a menacing, guttural roar that seemed to make the very air vibrate. It was a sound of impending doom. For a terrifying moment, the SEALs thought it was an enemy attack run. Riptide risked a glance over their rock barricade and saw it, a dark, brutal shape with straight wings and engines mounted high on its back, hugging the canyon floor, flying lower and slower than any jet had a right to. The A-10 Warthog. Hold your fire. It's a friendly. Riptide yelled, his voice filled with a wild, desperate hope. Ava lined up her first pass. Her targeting computer painted the enemy positions in stark, red diamonds. They were shockingly close to the SEAL's position. Danger close was an understatement. This was surgical work, with no room for error. A single misplaced round would mean disaster. She locked onto a heavy machine gun nest that was chewing up the SEAL's cover. Trident, Valkyrie. Going. In hot. Keep your heads down, she said calmly. She squeezed the trigger on her control stick. The world outside her cockpit erupted in a noise that defied description. It was not the crack of a rifle or the boom of a cannon. It was an apocalyptic, earth-shattering BRRT, the sound of the GRU-8 Avenger, a 7-barreled Gatling gun the size of a small car, spewing 30mm, armor-piercing incendiary rounds at a rate of 70 per second. A stream of fire, like a dragon's breath, tore across the canyon wall. The machine gun nest, the rocks around it, and the soldiers manning it simply vanished, vaporized into a cloud of pink mist and pulverized stone she rolled the Warthog onto. It sighed, weaving through the narrow canyon, and lined up another target, a mortar team setting up on a high ledge. Again, the cannon spoke its terrible language. The ledge disintegrated. She was a reaper scything through a field of wheat, her precision absolute, her fury controlled. On the ground, the SEALs, who had been moments from being overrun, could only stare in, or as the relentless enemy assault was shattered in seconds. The tide of the battle had been turned not by a wave, but by a tidal wave. Valkyrie. God bless you, Valkyrie, Riptide breathed into his radio, his voice thick with disbelief and gratitude. We were ghosts. You have no idea. I'm not done yet, Ava replied, her eyes scanning for new threats. As she circled for another pass, a new warning tone blared in her cockpit. Her threat detection system had picked up something new. Something powerful. She zoomed her sensors in on the location, deep within the canyon, exactly where her unauthorized scans had indicated. The system was powering up, but as the data streamed in, a cold knot of dread tightened in her stomach. This was no crude, jury-rigged militia weapon. The energy signature, the targeting frequency, the electronic handshake it was attempting with her aircraft systems, it was all too familiar. It was American. A new generation Stinger Iron manpads, a man-portable air defense system. A prototype, so advanced it was still classified. It shouldn't be in a testing facility in New Mexico, let alone in the hands of insurgents in the Zagros Mountains. This changed everything. This wasn't just an ambush, it was a setup. Someone had not only leaked the SEALs' mission details, but had also armed the enemy with cutting-edge American military hardware. The mission to extract a scientist was a lie, a cover story for something far darker. The SEALs were sent here to be eliminated, and this advanced weapon was the guarantee. Her mind raced back to Thorne. His fury at her discovery. His desperation. To keep her away from the mission. It wasn't about his ego or her father's legacy. He was directly involved. He had to be. Back at Nellis, Thorne was watching Ava's gun camera feed on the main screen, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. His perfectly planned operation was unraveling before his eyes. The SEALs were supposed to be wiped out, their deaths blamed on a tragic intelligence failure. The loss of the prototype Stinger system would have been written off, swept under the rug in the ensuing chaos. But Rostova, the ghost of his past, had refused to follow the script. Now he was exposed. If she survived and those SEALs were extracted, they would ask questions. An investigation would be launched. Her unauthorized scans would be re-examined. His illegal arms deal with a rogue faction, a deal that had made him a very wealthy man, would be uncovered. He had to silence her. Permanently. He couldn't order her shot down. That would be too obvious. But he could help the enemy do it for him. With a few keystrokes at his command console, he entered a string of commands, masking them as a system-wide diagnostic pulse. He accessed the IFF, identify friend or foe, transponder codes for Ava's A-10. Then, with a click of his mouse, he broadcasted her flight path, altitude, and her supposedly secure IFF signature on an open, unencrypted frequency. To the enemy on the ground, it was a gift from the heavens. The Stinger II system, which had been struggling to get a clean lock through her electronic countermeasures, now had everything it needed. He was painting a target on her back, guiding the missile himself. In the cockpit of the Warthog, a shrill, terrifying tone screamed through Ava's helmet. It was the one sound every pilot dreads. Missile lock. Solid. Unbreakable. Her tactical display showed the threat. The Stinger I launcher she had just identified now had a perfect firing solution on her. There was no time to think, no time to deploy countermeasures in a calculated sequence. There was only time to react. On the ground, Riptide and his men saw it. A puff of white smoke bloomed from a cave high on the cliff face. A moment later, a missile leaped into the air, a streak of white death screaming towards the sky. It corrected its course. Its seeker head locked unerringly onto the A-10 that had just saved their lives. Valkyrie, missile away. Brake. Brake right. Riptide yelled into the comms, a helpless, desperate warning. But the missile was too fast, the canyon too narrow. Ava saw the smoke trail arcing towards her, a serpent of fire coming to claim her. She had seconds to live. And in those seconds, she finally understood the depth of Thorne's betrayal. He wasn't just letting her die, he was actively helping. It happened. The world became a blur of instinct and motion. Ava yanked the control stick hard to the left, jamming her foot on the rudder pedal. The 40,000-pound Warthog, a plane built for stability and punishment, groaned in protest as she threw it into a violent, rolling scissor maneuver it was never designed to perform. G-forces slammed into her like a physical blow, pinning her to her seat, threatening to pull the consciousness from her mind. Chaff. Flares. Flares, she commanded, her voice strained but steady, as she simultaneously punched the countermeasures button on her console. Behind the jet, the sky bloomed with brilliant white magnesium flares, a desperate shower of incandescent decoys designed to fool the missile's heat-seeking eye. A cloud of aluminum chaff exploded outwards, creating a ghost image of her plane to confuse its radar. For a heart-stopping second, the missile wobbled, its guidance system struggling to distinguish between the real target and the fakes. But the Stinger II was too smart. It ignored the decoys and readjusted, its course unwavering. Ava had one last, desperate card to play. She chopped the power to her engines, a move that would make a flight instructor scream. The sudden drop-in. Her heat signature was a final, fleeting deception. The missile, closing at over twice the speed of sound, roared past where her engines had been a split second before. But its proximity fuse was flawless. It detonated just off her right wing. The explosion was deafening. A wave of force slammed into the A-10, and the cockpit was filled with the sickening sound of shredding metal. The plane bucked violently, throwing Ava against her straps. 1,000 pieces of razor-sharp shrapnel tore through the fuselage and wing. A fire warning light for her right engine flashed crimson on the console, followed by a cascade of other alarms: hydraulic failure, fuel pump offline, stall warning. The cockpit filled with the acrid smell of burning electronics. Through the shattered canopy, she could see flames licking from the engine nacelle, a torrent of angry orange against the grey sky. The control stick felt loose and unresponsive in her hand, like it was connected to nothing. She was flying a broken machine. On the ground, Trident 4 watched in horror as their Angel of Mercy was engulfed in a ball of black and orange fire. She's hit. Valkyrie's been hit, one of the SEALs shouted. Riptide grabbed his radio, his heart sinking. Valkyrie, what's your status? Talk to me. Eject. Get out of there. A moment of static-filled silence followed, an eternity in which 6 men held their breath. Then, her voice came back over the radio. It was strained, pained, but impossibly, shockingly, alive, negative. Trident. I can still fly. A pause, punctuated by the groan of tortured metal. But I'm a little worse for wear. I'm not leaving you. That was the moment everything changed for Jake Riptide Callahan. The doubt, the pity, the professional distance, it all melted away, replaced by a profound, unshakable respect. This pilot, this woman who had been mocked and dismissed, whose name he had heard spoken with contempt, was strapped to a burning wreck and was refusing to abandon them. She was no longer just air support. She was one of them. She was a warrior. Ava fought for control. With her right engine out and her hydraulics failing, the Warthog wanted to roll over and die. It took all her strength just to keep the wings level. She couldn't climb, she couldn't outrun anything. But the Stinger launcher was still down there, hidden in its cave, ready to finish the job. She had to destroy it. A conventional missile strike was out of the question. She couldn't get the altitude or the angle. The cave entrance was too small, too well fortified. She needed a different kind of key to open that door. And then, another one of her father's lessons, whispered to her during a late-night session. In an old flight simulator, surfaced from the depths of her memory. He had called it bowling for bad guys. An old, insanely risky tactic from the Second World War, skip bombing. The idea was to release a bomb or rocket at an extremely low altitude and let it skip off the surface of the ground or water, like a flat stone, directly into the side of a target. The margin for error was virtually zero. Flying that low, that slow, in a damaged plane, it was suicide. It was also her only chance. Trident, I'm making one more pass, she broadcasted, her voice grim with determination. I'm going to try something unconventional. Keep their heads down for me. Riptide understood immediately. You got it, Valkyrie. We'll give you all the cover you need. The SEALs laid down a furious barrage of suppressive fire, forcing the remaining insurgents to hunker down. Drawing their attention away from the sky, Ava wrestled the crippled Warthog around, lining it up with the mouth of the canyon. She descended, dropping lower and lower until she was flying just feet above the rock-strewn canyon floor. The ground proximity alarm screamed a continuous, frantic warning in her ear. Dust and debris kicked up by her jet wash swirled around the cockpit. The plane shuddered and shook, every rivet and joint groaning under the strain. Her hands ached from the force it took to manually wrestle the control surfaces, compensating for the lost hydraulics. Her targeting computer was useless for a shot like this. She had to do it by eye, by feel. Just like her father taught her. She saw the dark opening of the cave loom in front of her. Not yet, not yet, now. She squeezed the trigger. A single high-explosive rocket leaped from its pod under her wing. It didn't fly towards the cave. It shot downwards, striking the rocky ground 20 yards in front of it. It hit the ground at a shallow angle and, instead of exploding, ricocheted. The rocket, now a spinning, unguided projectile, skipped perfectly through the air, a streak of grey lightning, and vanished into the blackness of the cave. For a beat, nothing happened. Ava pulled back on the stick with all her might, praying. The broken plane would respond, praying it would climb before she plowed into the far canyon wall. Then, the world turned white. A low rumble became a deafening roar as the rocket found the missile stockpile inside the cave. A massive secondary explosion erupted from the mouth of the tunnel, a colossal ball of fire and smoke that engulfed the entire cliff face. The shockwave, even from a distance, slammed into her A-10, but this time it helped, pushing her upwards, giving her the precious lift she needed to clear the ridge. A ragged cheer erupted from the seals below. The primary threat was gone. The ambush was broken. Ava finally managed to shut down the flaming engine and stabilize the aircraft. She was losing fuel and hydraulic fluid, but the plane was holding together. She turned the Warthog's nose towards home, a long, slow limp back to friendly airspace. On the ground, Trident 4 was mopping up the last of the resistance, their relief palpable even over the radio. It seemed the worst was over. Then Riptide's voice cut through the air, all relief. Gone, replaced by a tone that was as cold and hard as ice. Valkyrie, be advised. We've secured enemy comms gear from that command bunker you just blew up. We are going through their data logs. He paused, and the silence that followed was heavy with dread. We found their intel source. They had everything. Our insertion point, our numbers, our equipment loadout, even our names. Another pause. Ava waited, her blood turning to ice. The leak came from inside Nellis. The final data packet, the one that gave them the green light. For the ambush, it was sent less than an hour before we landed. Riptide's voice was barely a whisper now, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. The authorization code on the transmission, it belongs to Colonel Marcus Thorne. The name hit the comms channel like a thunderclap. Colonel Marcus Thorne. The truth, stark and terrible, solidified in the thin air. Thorne hadn't just been negligent. He hadn't just been covering his tracks. He had orchestrated the entire massacre. He'd armed the enemy with America's own advanced weaponry and then sent Trident 4 into the grinder, intending for them to be erased. They were the loose ends in his treasonous plot, and their deaths were meant to be the final, bloody seal on his secret. Ava's defiance, her refusal to be the sidelined daughter of a disgraced pilot, had ripped that seal wide open, and now Thorne knew it. He knew she had survived. He knew the seals had survived. And he knew that Riptide was holding a data drive that contained his death warrant. He would not be waiting to face a court-martial. He would be trying to burn the evidence, and everyone who had seen it. A new alarm, one she had never heard before, suddenly blared in Ava's cockpit. A synthesized female voice announced, "Warning, external flight control detected. Manual override engaged." On her control panel, a small light labeled Remote Link glowed an ominous green. Her control stick began to twitch in her hand. Fighting her. The plane, her plane, was trying to bank left, towards the desolate heart of the desert, away from the airbase. She fought it, her muscles straining against the servo motors that were now receiving commands from another source. "Valkyrie, what's going on?" Riptide's voice demanded, sensing the new panic. "Thorne," Ava grunted, struggling with the controls. "He's locked me out. He's flying my plane." She remembered the briefings. Thorne had been the biggest champion of a new, experimental remote override system, the Guardian Angel program. It was designed to allow a ground controller to take over a compromised or damaged aircraft and land it safely. It was sold as a pilot's last resort. But in the hands of a trader, it was the perfect murder weapon. He was going to crash her. Warthog in the middle of nowhere, destroying the plane, the pilot, and the black box that recorded every detail of the flight. It would be a tragic, heroic end for the pilot who went rogue to save her comrades, but died due to catastrophic flight. System failure. Thorne would write her eulogy himself. The battle for control was a brutal, physical tug-of-war. The crippled plane groaned, torn between the commands of its pilot and the invisible signals of its betrayer. Ava knew she couldn't win this way. She couldn't outmuscle a computer. She had to sever the connection. Sarge's words came back to her. Another lesson from the hangar. This old girl's got secrets the new birds don't. They tried to make her all fancy and digital, but at her heart, she's still analog. Still got good old hydraulic cutoffs, in case the computers get any funny ideas. Her eyes darted to a small, guarded panel near her right knee. It was painted bright yellow, with the words, "Emergency Flight Hydraulics, Manual Disconnect." It was a relic, a mechanical kill switch that would sever all electronic input to the control surfaces. It would give her back control, but it would be raw, unassisted manual control. Flying a damaged, 15-ton jet with no hydraulic assistance was like trying to steer a freight train with a canoe paddle. But it was her only chance. Her hand shaking from the effort and adrenaline, she flipped up the guard and slammed her fist down on the lever. For a terrifying second, the plane went into a nosedive. The resistance in the stick vanished, replaced by an immense, dead weight. Then, using her legs and core for leverage, she hauled back with every ounce of her strength. Slowly, sluggishly, the Warthog responded. The nose lifted. The remote link light on her console blinked out. She was flying. Again. She was free. Thorne, watching his remote link sever on his monitor at Nellis, realized he had lost. His desperation turned to pure, reptilian instinct. He had one last move. He grabbed his command radio. "All stations, this is Colonel Thorne. Valkyrie 1 is not responding. The aircraft has been hijacked, its systems compromised. It is a threat to the base. Captain Davis," he barked, his voice ringing with false authority, "intercept and neutralize the target. I repeat, neutralize the hijacked aircraft." Miles away, Captain Hotshot Davis, finally airborne in his pristine F-16, received the order. He saw the damaged A-10 limping towards the base on his radar. He saw a target. He armed a Sidewinder missile. "Roger that. Command. Moving. To intercept. I have a lock." Ava's threat receiver screamed again. But this time, the signature wasn't from an enemy. It was from a friend. Hotshot was painting her with his targeting radar dot on the ground. Riptide and his team had just been picked up by a rescue helicopter. They were monitoring the command net, listening to Thorne's treachery in real time. "Hotshot, do not fire. Do not fire." Riptide roared into the radio, broadcasting on the open guard frequency for all to hear. "Valkyrie is a friendly. I say again, Valkyrie is a hero. Colonel Thorne is the traitor. We have proof of his treason." In his F-16, Hotshot was stunned, caught between a direct order from his colonel and a frantic, unbelievable plea from the legendary SEAL team he was sent to support. Who did he believe? Ava knew she couldn't outrun an F-16, and she couldn't dodge a Sidewinder in her state. She had only seconds before he fired. So she did the one thing a pilot should never do when being targeted. She turned towards the threat. She banked her battered Warthog, putting its ravaged frame on full display. She flew directly into his path, forcing him to see what had been done to her. To see the gaping holes in her wing, the scorched metal of her dead engine, the shattered canopy. This was not the profile of a hijacked plane. It was the profile of a survivor she got on his private channel. Her voice was quiet, devoid of anger or fear. It was just tired. "Davis, it's Ava. Look at my bird. Just look at it. Does this look hijacked to you? Or does it look like I just came through hell to save 6 American lives you left behind? Thorne sent them there to die. He sent me there to die. Now he's sending you to finish the job. Whose side are you on?" Hotshot stared through his canopy at the crippled, magnificent beast flying towards him. He saw the truth in its wounds. He broke off his attack, his missile lock vanishing from Ava's screen. "Command, I am breaking off," he announced, his voice firm. "I will escort Valkyrie 1 home." It was the final nail in Thorn's coffin. Riptide, now safely in the air, began broadcasting the audio from the enemy's data drive, Thorn's name, his authorization codes, the details of the arms deal, across every channel. The dam of deceit broke. In the Nellis command center, reality shifted. Air police, armed and grim-faced, stormed the room, their weapons leveled not at the screens, but at the man standing before them. Colonel Thorn stared in disbelief as they surrounded him, his empire of lies crumbling in a matter of seconds, brought down by the very communication system he had used to betray his country. Ava was now clear to land, but her final battle was with gravity. Her landing gear was damaged, only partially deploying. A belly landing was her only option. The base fell silent. Every person on the ground, from the general to the lowest-ranking airman, stood and watched, their eyes turned to the sky. Fire trucks and emergency crews raced alongside the runway as she descended. She brought the Warthog in low and slow, holding it just inches above the asphalt until the last possible second. With a final, gentle pull on the stick, she set it down. The sound was horrific, a high-pitched screech of tortured metal as the titanium belly of the Warthog scraped against the runway. A shower of brilliant orange sparks trailed behind her for 1,000 feet. But her touch was perfect. She kept the plane straight and steady, skidding to a halt directly in the center of the runway, a broken but defiant monument. For a moment, there was absolute silence. The world held its breath. Then, the canopy hissed open. And when they saw her, alive, climb down from the cockpit, the base erupted in a thunderous wave of cheers and applause. Weeks later, the Nevada sun shone brightly on a formal ceremony. Ava Rostova stood at attention, her chest adorned with the Air Force Cross. The official report was read aloud, not only detailing her heroism but also posthumously clearing the name of her father, Colonel Dmitry Rostova. His final mission was reclassified for what it was, a heroic act of sacrifice, its narrative twisted for 2 decades by the lies of a jealous rival. After the ceremony, as Ava stood alone, Riptide and the other 5 members of Trident 4 approached her. Their faces, usually hard and unreadable, were filled with a raw, profound respect. Riptide stopped before her. He looked at the medal, then into her eyes. "Captain," he said, his voice quiet but clear, "we are only alive because you refused to let us die. We owe you everything." He extended his hand. "It would be an honor to have you as our guardian angel anytime." Ava looked at his outstretched hand, then at the faces of the 5 other men who were alive because of her choice. The mockery, the whispers, the weight of her father's shadow, it was all gone. In its place was a respect that had been forged in fire and earned with courage. She smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her sea-storm eyes. She shook his hand firmly. "The honor was all mine, Commander." She was no longer just her father's daughter. She was Captain Ava Valkyrie Rostova. And as she looked up at the vast, blue, desert sky, she saw not a ceiling, but an endless horizon. She was finally home.